So today I'm going to speak performance recovery in team sport. So I've grown up in Rush County, Dublin, where I've been lucky enough to be playing and coaching member of Leave More GAA or St. Maur's GAA. So very good to have the opportunity to present here at this series and to be invited by the GAA and given my association with the code of Gaelic football over the years. So this started after when I finished my third level education at DCU, and I got an opportunity working as a games promoter with Dublin GAA, which led to a role working with NADA, and then directly myself, where we worked senior hurling and Gaelic football inter-county teams over a number of years. And over that time, I always had the desire to further studies and progress towards doing a PhD, where I got an opportunity at the AIS in 2016, where I commenced research into post-exercise water immersion following resistance training. And through time in Canberra, where I currently live, I got an opportunity with the Brumbies first team in 2017, which led to a full-time run. And I was with the first team up until the end of last year, and currently I've transitioned across to head of performance for the Academy Pathways underage programs for both men's and women's. So in this session, we're going to start and just have a quick look at what is performance, and then with a focus on evidence-based strategies that can be applied at low or no cost within a program. I'm going to give a very brief overview of some of my AIS research and use this to help illustrate how I practically apply that in a high performance setting. So first, looking at what is performance recovery, we first want to understand what fatigue is. So fatigue is either the inability to maintain the required force or power output, or to complete a task that was previously achievable within a recent time frame. So following fatigue and an exercise stimulus, then the body will seek to return to its pre-exercise state via the process of homeostasis. And that's where recovery and performance recovery comes in, which helps to restore the body to its pre-exercise level. And it does so between the end of one training session and the beginning of the next. So when we exercise, we have micro tears in the muscle fiber, or an accumulation of metabolic waste products. We deplete our energy stores and have fatigue and inflammation and swelling. So these can be seen as good in terms of the process of adaptation, and however, at the same time, to contribute to reduced performance levels. So ultimately, over time, where the horizontal line is a base fitness level, we want to follow the dotted trend line, where following exercise there's a decrement in performance, but with adequate recovery, where fitness supercompensate above our initial starting point, and over time we have improvements in fitness and in performance. So recovery is important when we have, after long training sessions, multiple times a day, during and approaching competition periods, when we have identified an athlete at an increased risk of injury or illness, if athletes report high levels of muscle soreness and general fatigue. However, it's worth considering how and when we prescribe our recovery strategies, as more is not better. So some exceptions to this where we might also want to consider, do we need to recover? So when is the next competition and how frequent is the competition? What training phase are the athletes in? So typically during pre-season, we may not need to prioritize recovery as much as we would when we're in a competition phase and looking to peak in order to maximize performance. We also need to understand the nature of the training. So whether the sport or activity involves eccentric muscle actions or lengthening muscle actions and or contact, which may lead to higher levels of muscle soreness. And then whether the athletes are excessively fatigued compared to what is normal for that individual, and also understanding external environmental temperatures. So typically we'll need to recover when it's hotter and humid outside. The last consideration is how often are high quality sessions required. So in season, coaches will look for high quality sessions all the time, and recovery is of increased importance. Not to say the opposite is the case during pre-season. However, we understand that the athletes may be carrying residual fatigue between sessions when training is more dense during a pre-season period. The final consideration is also holistically in terms of what's the best use of the athlete's time. So especially important in the case of a GAA where they have multiple competing demands, so study, work, etc. And we need to be very mindful that of the time demands we're placing on our athletes. And sometimes I need to get home after training to cook a meal and get an early night can be just as effective as prescribing additional recovery strategies at the training environment. So there's an extensive list of performance recovery strategies that are available to athletes alike, and there's quite a list we can see here, varying from physical as well as psychological options. However, with all these options, it's important to consider what the hierarchy of these may be. And typically it's accepted that the base of the pyramid, we should have sleep and nutrition hydration. And upon that, we have all the other strategies which typically might be classified as performance recovery strategies. So we have the non-negotiables of sleep, nutrition, hydration in place. Then from there, we can use the performance recovery strategies in order to gain extra benefits as the preparation program. So sleep is seen as the key one, and where both physical and psychological rest. Typically, the athletes will need more than the general population. So after a hard training day, athletes may need an additional 20 to 30 minutes on top of what normal daily sleep requirements are. So we can see here on the left that there's some research in sports that show the effect of sleep deprivation can have on strength, the perceived exertion for a given exercise stimulus, as well as reductions in aerobic capacity. However, positively, with improved sleep on the right, we can see that it improved accuracy, reaction time, physical performance, and cognitive alertness with improved sleep. So sleep requirements are highly individual. So some may get by on 7.5, 8 hours. Other athletes may need up to 9 hours or more. All this will vary with age. So typically adolescents, children will have a greater sleep requirement than adults. So as coaches, is needed for our age group, but also work with the individual to understand what their individual requirements are above the norms. So, and a general starting point that's widely accepted is roughly 8 hours per night for adults and maybe 9 for children and adolescents. But we can see that there's highly individual across sports and athletes sleep levels reported, and you can note there with up as high as 11 to 12 hours, and some athletes report as low as 4 to 5 hours. But typically, characteristics of a good sleep would be falling asleep within less than 20 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes. If you or your athletes report falling asleep as soon as their head it should normally take 10 to 15 minutes of bed rest prior to falling asleep. Ideally, we want to have a few wakenings through the night, and considerations there following evening training and the amount of fluid that's consumed. Ideally as well, we should feel refreshed within 1 hour upon waking most days of the week. So tips for improving sleep are making sure that is cool, dark, quiet, and comfortable, and then also having consideration around distraction that may negatively affect you during your wind down period. So ideally, we would like athletes to have a power down hour. So the hour preceding bedtime that they're starting to switch off gadgets, dim lights. However, we understand that this is not realistic in athletes that are typically time poor. So even working with athletes to get a 15 to 20 minute period where they're starting to wind down will greatly help their sleep onset that evening. So just being mindful that a lot of athletes nowadays will typically use their phone as an alarm and will bring it into the bedroom with them. But just suggesting strategies that using the built-in functions such as the do not disturb or airplane mode, and or even the placement of the phone on the opposite side of the room, which might also help with getting out of the bed in order to turn off the alarm in the morning. And just some stats suggesting that a high proportion of people are woken by their phone. So really important to use some of those built-in features. So overall, consistency is the key. With sleep, ideally, we want to have same wake time as much as possible across the week. Then naturally, the bedtime in the evening will tip after. It's okay to have lie-ins at the weekend and to catch up potentially. So lie-ins of up to 2 hours, okay, without overly affecting the sleep onset that night. Being mindful to plan fluid intake before bed. If finishing an evening training session, making sure to have some food and or salt with any fluid in order to help its absorption and retention. So obviously avoiding caffeine later in the day, and understanding that there's about an 8-hour period where the effects of caffeine may take to wear off. So just working backwards from there, and then using naps appropriately. So napping obviously a very effective recovery strategy, but equally making sure that they're early in the day and of appropriate duration so as not to affect the sleep on that evening. So typically approaching competition, a lot of athletes will report issues falling asleep. So one way of alleviating stress here is communicating to athletes that a single night of poor sleep isn't going to have an overly detrimental impact on performance if they have slept well and recovered well all week leading up to the game. So the idea here of sleep banking, where you can build up good energy levels in the week leading up to the game, and not placing overly emphasizing early nights the night before the game, because sometimes this will coincide with lower trainings. So athletes may not be typically as tired as they would normally be following a hard training day. So sometimes it's okay that they might stay up or for an extra half an hour if that will help then with getting good sleep on going to bed. So otherwise, having strategies available such as progressive relaxation, breathing techniques can all help with relaxation. And if athletes really struggle, after half an hour, then suggest to them to get up and, for example, do some, jot any notes that may have been causing their mind to wander and race, so that they can then go back with a rested mind. Other strategies include consuming foods containing tryptophan, such as milk or almonds, that can help with sleep onset. Kiwi fruit is another one that's shown to be good and help with melatonin production. So in terms of hydronutritional strategies, so the 4 R's of replenish, repair, rehydrate, and then revitalize, with fruits and vegetables containing a wide variety of minerals and antioxidants, is a simple way for athletes to think about their post-exercise hydronutritional recovery requirements. So from there, building upon a good foundation of sleep, nutrition, hydration, then we can move into some of the hydrotherapy strategies that are available for us to use. So hydrotherapy typically involves immersion of the body in water. And usually this is in a bath or a pool, however, can also take place in the shower. The idea here is that the combination of hydrostatic pressure, so pressure from the water, as well as the temperature effects, may help with promoting blood circulation and increase venous return. So typically different temperatures are used, so cold, hot, or a lukewarm thermoneutral are water temperatures that we can use to describe hydrotherapy. So like I mentioned, baths or bins, showers, swimming pools, and then depending on where you live and what you've access to, time of the year, whether beach, lake, may also be considerations too. So typically, I'll always prescribe hydrotherapy sessions or any performance recovery sessions in a 15-minute window. And that's being mindful, taking a holistic approach, that the athletes have a number of demands from their sport. For example, technical expertise, understanding the tactical requirements of the coach, and then all the other aspects that goes as part of their physical. So we want to use our recovery strategies in a time efficient. Leads then move on to the next thing, whether that's getting home, get some bed rest. But 15 minutes, with some research suggesting that good outcome can also be obtained from 6 to 10 minutes of hydrotherapy strategies. So typically cold water immersion will be used to reduce skin, muscle and core temperature, reduce inflammation, pain and thermal strain, treat acute soft tissue injuries, and perceptions of muscle soreness following exercise. So in terms of some considerations, we ideally want to recommend that athletes engage in whole body immersion in order to maximize pressure across the body, but also to immerse the highest percentage of muscle mass possible. So 15 degrees is typically an ideal temperature for water, but understanding that there's what's called a dose-response relationship. So if in cooler water, say 10 minutes at 10 degrees has been shown to have the same outcomes in terms of perceived muscle soreness as 15 minutes at 15 degrees. So usually during most seasons of the year, tap water will typically give us approx 50 degrees. So the need to have large bags of ice filling wheelie bins be as important, especially during the winter months. Where beach and sea is available, this will tick the box in terms of hydrostatic pressure, the temperature, as well as also getting the athletes outdoors, which can have other mental and psychological benefits. Good thing with access to beach or pools that also engage in active recovery. So moving on then to hot water immersion. So hot water can be prescribed in order to increase range of motion, mostly beneficial for athletes that might have stiff backs, and can also then use the heat combined with flexibility training to help increase mobility both before and after a session. Hot water, through helping to open the peripheral blood vessels, increases blood flow, can help with post-session relaxation, and can also be considered as an additional stimulus or heat stimulus to help with some of the aerobic adaptations, such as developing the sweat response that might help, especially when approaching competition during the warmer and summer months. So we should limit use of hot water during hot and humid environments, and we're trying to drive some of these aerobic adaptations and provide that extra heat stimulus, especially if there's a recent injury. We want to avoid the hot, and again, working off that 15 minutes in duration, and that in heat, whether it's hot water or even a sauna, that there'll be an increase in core body temperature. So really important to make sure that our athletes are hydrating properly during and post any exposure to heat. Ideally as well, we want conservative with the use of heat between hard training days. So ideally, programming of any heat is done at the end or before a rest day, or before a light. Heat can also be a good strategy after resistance training, where there's some evidence that the use of cold can blunt some of the strength and muscle mass, increase in lean muscle mass gains associated with weights training. So then, when hot and we can prescribe contrast water therapy. So contrast is good because it's proposed to blood flow and circulation through opening and closing of the peripheral blood vessels, and combined with the hydrostatic pressure, it helps to really increase blood circulation. Also showing perceptions of fatigue and soreness. So some of the considerations here would be using contrast between same-day sessions, or if backing up between hard days, it's also good to help with increasing the removal of waste metabolites following exercise. Typically, we'll always get athletes finishing cold, and including a cool rinse shower, so they have that perception of feeling awake and fresher on completion of the hydrotherapy session. Showers can also be good, and also if there's limited access to baths, it can be a time-effective method to obtain contrast showers between sessions or at the end of a training day. So typically, ideally, 7 by 2 minute rotations, cold, hot, cold, starting and finishing on the cold when you have access to hot and cold. Otherwise, showers durations are typically recommended, to also consideration as well in terms of not wanting to waste a lot of water. So you can periodize the use of contrast across a season. So we'll get to that a little bit later, but you can, depending on the adaptation and the outcomes you want, you can have a greater percentage of hot versus cold, depending on the training phase. So the other use of pools can be good for active recovery, and again, so the research suggesting good similar outcomes with 6 to 10 minutes of active and stretching, combined with water immersion. So showers can be an excellent strategy when baths and pools are not available. So after a hot day or a hard training session, up to 5 minutes of a cool rinse can really help with feeling better. But understanding that baths are better at reducing core temperature than shower, the body will be directly immersed in the water. Contrast showers are good, especially when athletes are between sessions and they just want a quick strategy. For example, 3 each by 30 seconds hot, 30 seconds cold, where you might be training in the morning, go to lunch, and then come back for the afternoon sessions. So compression garments are the next performance recovery strategy that are available to athletes, are proposed to increase blood flow through venous return, and have been shown to reduce perceived soreness, reduce effects associated with exercise. So considerations around what to wear, when to wear, and for how long, as follows, where typically we'll recommend athletes to maximize coverage, so buying long sleeve or long leg garments where possible. However, if budget is a consideration, one of the most effective compression garments are compression socks. So especially for athletes that might return home after training and may have a period of travel, compression socks can be good to help with that venous return of the lower limbs, and just increase that passive blood circulation when in a seated position. So typically a minimum hours post exercise is recommended. Athletes are not normally recommended to sleep in compression, but it's okay to do so. But just understanding that athletes will typically wake up slightly more dehydrated if they sleep in compression garments due to thermal effects that they may also have. So understanding the options that athletes have, and which strategies they may consider to implement in their own home training environment. Typically, we'll work by providing a points-based recovery system. So where you can see on the right-hand side at the top, we have the non-negotiables of nutrition, hydration. But then at the bottom, there's a list of performance recovery strategies that they can choose to implement in order to accumulate the desired number of points that might be prescribed. The good thing as well about these systems are that athletes can use strategies that are directly available to them, that they enjoy doing. And they can also mix and match, and which might provide some variation across the training week. So when athletes will typically complete their gym and field sessions in the same venues, having options to mix up the post-session recovery strategies can help with alleviating the boredom of training. So a sample recovery timeline after training or competition would typically be performing a warm down in the first 15 minutes, and towards the end of that, getting their phase 1 nutrition, hydration, and small snacks ingested. Then, if time and facilities permit, then performing a hydrotherapy strategy. And as they get changed, if compression garments are available, they could typically wear them for up to 2 hours. And working towards then having their main phase 2 nutrition, having their main meal, and in other activities, and mentally helping them switch off following training, whether that be through social or other relaxation strategies. Understanding that the next day, maybe considering pool active recovery, stretching, or other methods, and at all times making sure to maximize sleep quality and quantity across the week, and with reference here to their wake times in order to keep that good habits. So next, I'm going to give a very brief overview of some of my AIS performance recovery research outcomes, and the idea here is just to show then how implementation of this in practical team sport setting, how it has guided some of my thinking. So the nature of the project that we undertook was to look and therapy. So comparing ice baths with a hot spa or contrast water immersion, how that affects performance, inflammatory and adaptive responses in the short term. So over the 40 over longer terms. So when done repeatedly over a 4-week block. And these in response to following whole body resistance training and using athletes as our participants. So I was lucky enough to have access to the AIS performance recovery facility, where on the top two you can see the cold pool, and then at the bottom in the back, at the back of the picture, you can see then the hot spa. So the cold temperature was 15 degrees and the hot pool is 38 to 40 degrees. On the bottom left, you can see what's called the river, which would be then a thermoneutral or lukewarm temperature of 28 degrees. So with the study looking at the short-term effects, we had the AIS Centre of Excellence, Volleyball Australia, and local semi-professional Canberra Heat athletes take part. And for the training study, then we had the Brumbies under 20s from the 2017 squad took part. And again, looked at the AIS strength and conditioning facility in order to carry out the exercise. But overall, some high level preliminary outcomes were that choice and temperature of hydrotherapies didn't influence short nor medium to long term inflammatory performance responses to resistance training in athletes. So I guess sometimes no finding is also a finding in itself, and I will mention that these were preliminary outcomes, and a more detailed analysis of the data is currently underway. However, just preliminary outcomes that practitioners should consider other recovery strategies, i.e. sleep, nutrition, hydration as the priority, but also we need to understand the individual responses. So what I did see is that some individuals responded very favorably to certain strategies, and likewise others negatively. So working with the individual to understand their responses and their personal preferences is key when designing a recovery program for an individual or sport. So I'd like to just at this point thank my PhD supervisors, and employers for the opportunity to carry out this research, and equally acknowledging all those that went before, my lecturers at University of Limerick and Dublin City University, as well as Kieran Collins from the Institute of Technology, Tala, and the Gaelic Sports Research Centre, who would have helped me with learning the research skills and processes to allow me capitalise on taking these opportunities. So in terms of then practical application of performance in team sports, so first of all, just going broad to narrow, in terms of how I seek to work and engage with coaches and other performance and backroom staff, ultimately I'm looking to maximize transfer and doing to competition performance, both physical and mental performance, and doing so in a way integrating with the coaches and other backroom sports science and sports team in order to holistically get the best product for the athlete and the team. So with that, through the prescription of field or gym-based activity, where we're looking to elicit a training response and hopefully have a performance-enhancing effect, then we'll then consider the performance recovery strategies in order to optimize and maximize these, and doing so where we seek to maximize training and competition availability for selection. So all this is leading towards improving the sport-specific and then individual team performance and preparation leading into competition. So as part of that, then across the backroom, we will have allocate the various roles and responsibilities, and we can see approximately midway down there's lead and assist allocated to the implementation of the recovery programming and the implementation of dodges and education to the athletes. So some of the principles that we adhere to are as follows. So during pre-season, the focus is to optimize performance in the next session, understanding that there will be residual fatigue from the previous session. However, in season, we're looking to maximize and obtain peak performance in each training and competition opportunity. So from there, then the terminology that we will use. So during pre-season, we're looking to see what do we need to do to maximize adaptation to training. Whereas in season, switch to more using both recovery and what do we need to do to maximize recovery, what do we need to do to maximize performance. So just a slightly different focus there that we take and that we work with the athlete to understand in terms of the choices they make. So the big rocks are always sleep, nutrition, hydration, and then recovery strategies come on top of that and afterwards. So typically we'll take a coach-guided, player-driven approach. So as coaches, we will prescribe the content, but we will hand it over to the players to drive the implementation and adherence to the recovery program. So the idea here is that a lot of the time the coaches will stand over the athletes, whether it be on the field or in the gym, and we like to sort of step away from doing that in the recovery setting, because if I force you to do a certain strategy that you may not, can we call that recovery? Or and so ultimately we want to educate the athletes as to why they should do it, and then by them opting in and choosing that they will get greater physical and psychological benefits. So we have a bit of a mantra where we get the players to own the grey. So understanding that players might train between 2 to 4 a day. And so it's what they do in the 20 to 22 hours that will determine the adaptations and performance outcomes that they get from their program. So the grey is when the player looks at their weekly training schedule. Training sessions are color coded, whereas the grey is the area where I guess it's their lifestyle and it's their non-training time, and that's where they're going to really get the benefits. So owning the grey is the phrase that's coined. So typically we'll during pre-season we'll prioritize the programming of hot over cold. So looking to try and leverage some of the aerobic adaptations that can be gained through doing either hot water immersion or sauna post-exercise. However, we'll switch the focus during in-season, where typically we'll prescribe more cold, especially in the latter half of the week approaching competition, in order to reduce perceived muscle soreness and blunt any inflammatory responses that may be still taking place post-exercise. Over the course of the pre-season, we will generally prescribe athletes a variety of strategies that we believe help from a physical and physiological point of view. And then in season, once the athletes have been exposed to all these strategies, we will then provide what we believe is the best from a physical, physiological point of view, but also make sure to offer there's adequate choice so the athlete can choose the strategy that they feel works best for them, and also leave on the placebo up that might come with that. So in line with the planning and periodizing the physical training, we will also plan and periodize the recovery program and consideration around what performance recovery strategies we will provide at different times to complement the physical training plan. We'll also education and how this is delivered, whether it be in a small group or in a one-to-one session. In terms of the ownership, we'll always try and leverage towards an empowerment approach, especially when it comes to the recovery. So we have various fatigue monitoring techniques that we will use over at different times of the week and over the season. And analogy of similar to the dashboard on a car, just understanding how the athlete is tracking and trending, noting that the best one is always trying to refine your coaching eye and asking the athlete how they are in the morning and just engaging them in conversation. So the idea here of showing this is show that this is how it can be done, but not necessarily how it should be done. The idea that any planned or periodized training is better than a non-periodized approach hold true. So suggestion here is just to consider how you might plan on your recovery, and you will get better outcomes than not doing so at all. So lastly, just sample pre-season schedule, where the players will typically train Monday, Tuesday with a light recovery day on the Wednesday, then back up Thursday, Friday with a light skill session on a Saturday morning. So as you can see, quite a lot of sessions across the morning and afternoon. And here I've just highlighted in green the different recovery strategies that we will use across the week. So you can see typically there's a window and an opportunity there between the morning and the afternoon, where on a Monday we tried to implement a short nap, and where the players would go home, those that live nearby, or else sleep on, where we're lucky enough to have access to sleep room. So with that, then evening we would prescribe cold contrast water therapy, understanding that the players are backing up the next day. So we'd have a small amount of cold there, but we'd have a ratio 2-to-1. We prioritize heat with a small amount of cold, given they're backing up. As you can see on the Tuesday and Thursday, in between the morning and afternoon, we'll use contrast chairs as a time efficient strategy. A short protocol such as 3 by 40 seconds hot, 20 seconds cold, each prior to them going for lunch, and just to feel a bit fresher by always finishing on cold. Then end of Tuesday afternoon, before a rest and recovery day on the Wednesday, that's when we will program our heat via hot pool or sauna. And then again, helping with those aerobic adaptations. Then on Wednesday, the athletes will come in and lucky enough to be able to get a massage and then take part in flexibility, mindfulness, and a hydrotherapy session. And likewise, end of the week, finishing with flexibility on the Friday. In season, then the first half of the week is quite similar. However, in the second half of the week, we can see then there's an increasing use of cold after the training session on the Thursday and before they have a recovery block in that afternoon. Then on the Friday, we switch more to providing but giving the players the choice to choose what for them, given that it's match day -1, and ultimately we want the players to be confident going into the game on the Saturday. Over the weekend, post-game, we would use the 100 points method to help with the players getting a mental break from the venue, but completing their recovery sessions in their own time away from the training venue. So happy to take any questions and discuss any of the previous content at this stage.
Barry, thanks for that. A really intriguing presentation and a good insight to what goes on with yourselves, with the Brumbies, and also the research work you've done. We have maybe 10 or 15 minutes for questions, if that's okay. So just based on some of the previous sessions that we've had, a lot of the speakers have spoken about how this COVID time is really going to put an emphasis on recovery when we are back to full training sessions. Maybe what initial advice would you have for coaches on that?
So hopefully athletes have been quite diligent during COVID at completing some exercise, so that there's not going to be such a sharp transition when they return back to team training. However, we understand that there will be some cases where athletes will have regressed during this period. So really important to, I guess, rebuild the load steadily, understanding that the longer that the athletes have been laid off and not training, the longer it's going to take to gradually rebuild the training loads to what they would have been previously capable of achieving. So typically for a 6 to 8 week layoff, depending on what percentage of reduction that they have experienced in their training loads, but it might take a 3 to 4 week period to rebuild back up to where they were. So onus there really on us as coaches to make sure that we're prescribing training appropriately, and also ensuring that there's adequate down weeks built in as we seek to progressively build training loads over time. But really coming back to, I guess, whatever monitoring tools we have available to us, understanding that the best ones, or my belief that the best one is that using our coaching eye, observing the athletes as they're approaching training or as they're warming up, and also engaging them in conversation and just asking how they are they physically, how's the mind, how well did they sleep yesterday, and that will give us a lot of valuable information.
It's very interesting that you say that the most fundamental ones and the non-negotiables, as you call them, were sleep, hydration, and nutrition. For those coaches that are listening, what sort of hydration, nutrition protocols might you try and put in place for your teams after training?
Well, I think one of the simplest strategies, let's say, that what we might call phase one, so 15 minutes on completion of training. Chocolate milk has been shown to be a really good option, containing a mix of carbohydrates and protein, while also offering vitamin D and calcium. So they're good, cost-effective and available strategies that I reckon we should be guiding athletes towards before considering the use of supplements. But yeah, just otherwise, a yogurt, a couple of pieces of fruit, some nuts, seeds are all good options. And then working towards having a main meal between 60 to 120 minutes post-training, where you're then getting your protein, 2 veg and carbohydrate source on top of that.
And it seems that a lot of the return to play protocols that will be in place in the next number of weeks are going to put a lot of emphasis on the individual player being self-sufficient. For example, changing rooms and clubhouses may not be open, and you're going to really expect your players to bring all of that material themselves.
Mm-hmm. Fully agree. The AIS have implemented a mantra of get in, train, get out. So the idea, as you've said, is that players come togged out ready to train, and then they leave and shower at home. So with that, it's also, we need to minimize the sharing of water bottles. So players have to look after that themselves and make sure that they, and we've seen that ourselves in the week or two that we've come back, that players are, sometimes forgetting their water bottles and are suffering for it through the session, and we can't help them in that regard. We've given them all individual water bottles, but as you say, the onus is on them to make sure. And I think that, we can look at this as a positive that can come from this situation, where as coaches we can step back and sort of work with the players and athletes to put the onus back on them to take a little more responsibility in terms of their own preparation before, during, and after training.
Yeah, I think so as well. I'm thinking like that small little steps that players can take, like having some fruit in the car or in their gear bag for after training, their own water bottles, as you suggested, and things like that would be really, really simple. I'm also thinking maybe that there might be some very simple communication strategies that coaches can engage with, text messages and so on, just to remind players of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fully agree. I guess as well, if it can be tied in, something that I've seen work really well is having mini teams challenges built in order to drive competition within a group. And maybe if there's an opportunity to factor in, let's say the preparation side of things, and sort of points for the group that have the best prepared, and in terms of their nutrition and hydration, can be a good way of just creating an awareness and education around what they should be doing. But
yeah, again, like you said, this could be a positive that comes out of this COVID situation, whereby players are taking a lot more responsibility for their own recovery and development over a period of time. And I suppose, again, one of the interesting things that's going to come here is that for lots of teams or coaches, especially at club level, their leagues might only have just started, or maybe hadn't even started when we had to close down. So they're really coming into a brand new season, maybe not having had huge volumes of activity since maybe even towards the end of last year. So I think that's something that coaches are going to have to be really, really conscious of.
Yeah, no, fully agree. And there's examples in other sports that we can look to. I think it was going back to 2011, and the NFL had an issue, and there was before there was some collective bargaining agreement, there was a delayed return to training, or a condensed preseason, and there was a massive spike in Achilles injuries observed, and even just anecdotally here in Australia, it's been observed that some of the NRL rugby league teams that have come back over the last 2 weeks, that there's been an increase in soft tissue injuries. So it's going to be a massive challenge, and I think it's but again, educating the players that sort of for them to reduce their injury risk, that anything they can do now during isolation, or when restrictions ease, and sort of even in small group sessions will really help to provide the platform. And I guess it also sort of considerations around sort of making sure that sort of athletes are training appropriately, and not just going on long road runs, but doing movements and sessions that are related to their sport and their position.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's again that was some of the stuff that we spoke about before, especially with Eamon O'Reilly, who's a physiotherapist, and he was speaking about that issue of people going out for 5 and 10K runs on roads, especially, which can be very unforgiving on the body. especially if they're not doing any of the recovery strategies that you spoke about here. Again, the one of the things that I'm thinking about for the next number of weeks is that players might be able to do a lot of the hydration, or sorry, the hydro recovery strategies with contrast bath, showers and so on, again based at home. That it'll be a case of just educating them as the right type of or protocol to use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fully agree. So as a start, maybe 3 by 40 seconds hot, 20 seconds cool, and that can be achieved in a 3-minute period. So that could be a good option, just to help somebody refresh after a session, or before, if they were training again later that day. But yeah, always finishing on the cold, and then you're just going to feel fresher getting out of the shower or the bath, as the case may be.
And I think a lot of players might be quite heartened by your point about not necessarily requiring ice. That you know, that this is, like I said, this is something that you can do at home with your own shower, your own bath. There's no huge amounts of equipment or specialized things required.
Yeah, a lot of players might be happy, and also a lot of kit men too, hopefully. But and I think as well, it's just sort of the other thing to mention is sort of also understanding what we have around us outdoors. So, you know, beaches, parks, mountains, just getting outdoors, getting away is really good for the body and mind. And then also, you know, I guess because of the nature of the recent period of isolation, I reckon, you know, in accordance with government guidelines, but when socially distanced catch-ups can resume, that's going to be really good for the mind, and helping with that balance between across the training program.
Yeah, and again, it's something that maybe some coaches might think, well, you know, it's not really something that I have ever had to do before. But I'm even thinking then of your points-based system, and the number of points that you might allocate to different recovery strategies and things like that. And have you advice for coaches maybe as to what that might look like, or how many points, or what's the accumulation of recovery look like?
So I think, first of all, it's just keeping it super simple, and the majority of the strategies that are listed, you know, should be, you know, free or low cost at most. So in line with the philosophy that sleep, nutrition and hydration are non-negotiables, I typically wouldn't allocate points for them, and then I'd be starting off with allocating points for the performance recovery strategies. So let's say, you know, a foam rolling and flexibility session, including mobility and light active movements, that can be one of the best forms of active recovery and increasing blood flow. So performing that for a minimum of 15 to 30 minutes could accumulate the greatest number of points. And then I guess sort of so from there, maybe considering a hydrotherapy strategy next. So going with a contrast shower, which we know all players should have access to. But having less points allocated towards that, for example, 30 points. Then from there, maybe some of the psychological strategies. So engaging in a period of relaxation combined with breathing, for example, progressive muscle relaxation, where they might breathe in and out, and starting with the feet or the lower limbs, and just muscle group by muscle group, with every time they exhale, working on relaxing that muscle group as they work through the body. So doing something like that might accumulate 20, 25 points, and then maybe finishing with maybe where you can bring in some, let's say, if depending if it was after a gym session, maybe having some additional protein might accumulate some an additional 10 points, but understanding that they need to go back and have that main meal as a non-negotiable. So I guess there's no right or wrong way. Can we incorporate a little more fun and enjoyment along the way? So maybe sort of having a socially distanced catch up with a family member might offer 30 or 40 points, and calling over to an old relative or a neighbour or doing a good deed might be something that might go down well in this current period. So I'd encourage coaches to think outside the box and think of their group and players that they have and facilities and environment available to them in their locality and try and work from there.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's a great opportunity here for coaches to be a little bit innovative in what they're doing and how they suggest. And like you said, there's a good chance to keep up maybe the sort of community work that lots of clubs have been engaged in over the last little while. And there's also a really good opportunity for players to take ownership of themselves and their recovery. And while the coach might be prescribing a suite of things, obviously players have different preferences and even different capabilities of organizing or being involved in certain things. So I think what you're saying here of giving players options as to what they wish to do, and weighting them based on the points so that players come to understand which might be more important could be a really positive thing for all coaches to look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, fully agree.
And then for the younger player or the adolescent player, who mightn't have as much, we'll say, authority over things if they're at home with parents and so on, are there slightly different strategies or different elements that you can do?
Well, the same principles will still hold. I guess the challenges with the younger athletes are typically that their body clock and circadian rhythms are slightly different, where they're typically let's say night owls, and they'll want to stay up a bit later, looking at TV, playing computer games. So for them, the challenge is probably more around the sleep side of things, and trying to make sure that they're trying to go to bed at a reasonable hour, and I guess maybe the understanding that the body will typically prioritize physical and physiological recovery in the first half of the sleep cycle, with the more cognitive recovery associated with REM and dreaming in the second half of the sleep cycle. So I guess if we can educate our younger athletes that they're growing bodies and bones and muscles, and the need to try and capitalize on some of that sleep before midnight would be worth 2 hours of sleep afterwards, or as our grandparents or mothers would have told us over the years. So I think with them the challenge is around giving them strategies to manage the distractions posed by technology, and just trying to at least be aware of it, or and sort of that power down period of 15 minutes if our younger athletes could engage in that to their ideal bedtime, that might help a lot with those groups. But I think it's just the simple strategies, I think, with the younger age groups, like performing a good cool down, warm down after exercise is probably where they need to start, and sort of and then just having something packed in the gear bag as a small snack. So I'd be keeping it simple with with those age groups.
Okay, I think we're out of time, Barry. I wanted to say thanks very much for everything you've done this afternoon, in your time this morning for our time, and all of the effort and work you've been putting in for the last number of weeks on this. We really appreciate that, and we really appreciate all of the time and effort that you went to putting together this session. For those people who might wish to contact Barry, you can see his contact details, Twitter and email here on the screen. So I'm sure Barry will be available to answer any questions or queries that you might have after this session as well. So for us, that's the end of our session this evening, and we'll see you again at the next session.